Well, good morning to our audience in Mexico and good afternoon to all of those who are joining us from Europe. I'm Érika Ruiz Sandoval, and I welcome you to the fourth online edition of the EU-Mexico Think Tank Dialogue Initiative. Today, we will be talking about the consequences of COVID-19 on climate change policies. COVID-19 and climate change share numerous characteristics. They are both giant threats for life on the planet as we know it. Both depend on individual responsibility and collective action. Both need a better understanding of science and technology. Both need international cooperation at its best. Both demand solid global governance. And in both cases, we have very little time to act. Furthermore, lockdown measures all over the globe have brought about possibly the biggest fall in carbon emissions since World War II, although they might just be temporary if no structural change is made in the way we produce, consume, work, move, and live. To better understand what are the main impacts this health crisis has brought to both the European Union and Mexico in terms of their previous and ongoing efforts on climate change, we will talk with Christian Egenhofer, Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Energy, Climate, and Environment Program at the Center for European Policy Studies, Boris Graizbord, National Program Director for LEAD Mexico and a lecturer and researcher at the Center for Demographic, Urban, and Environmental Studies at the Colegio de México, Annika Hedberg, Head of the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe Program and Senior Policy Analyst at the European Policy Center, and Solange Márquez Espinoza, Prospective Partner in Consultoría Estratégica, Professor at UNAM's Law School, and Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, COMEXI. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your thoughts with us. As the conversation moves along, feel free to post your questions on the online chat of this webinar. All participants can see them, and at the end, we'll select a few for them to answer. Apologies in advance if we don't get to all of them live, but now let's begin. The first question goes to Christian. What is the European Green Deal, and will this roadmap remain a keystone element of the general recovery strategy of European economies after COVID-19? You have 5 minutes, Christian.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning to all of us I'm landed here now in Germany, not Brussels any longer, but doesn't really matter. Now, let me just give you a few thoughts about the Green Deal, what it is, what it has been, which was one of the big mission statements for this new commission. Technically, you could see it's a roadmap of actions towards net zero or the climate neutrality objective. And if you want to understand it a bit separately, it is also a means to align, essentially that's what it is, a means to align all EU policy towards the climate neutrality or the net zero objective. You know, in Europe, we're using this terrible term mainstreaming. I don't know whether it means anything outside Brussels, but I mention it just for for those who have been in Brussels hearing this. You can also see it as an EU nationally determined contribution, the NDC, which for the first time has really gone all the way to the net zero climate neutrality objective. In that sense, I would say it's not that much different from whatever other countries like Mexico, South Africa, you name them, have there, except for two really critical points. One is, of course, the ambition, net zero by 2050 climate neutrality, which is quite ambitious. And, you know, in Europe, there are also countries like Finland who have a target of net zero by 2035, or Sweden 2045. The second really difference to the traditional NDC, if you wish, is that it's really very, very comprehensive, includes every single policy. You name me one, it will be in there somewhere, at least in a footnote. You know, this goes for soil, fisheries, trade, you name any policy is included. What does it do? What's the interlinkages to climate change? Now, when you look at the new elements, which, you know, probably most interesting here for you, the innovations, if I would want to say, of the traditional NDCs and also of the traditional way the European Union has presented itself, I think there are two. One is the just transition concept, just transition is the big catchword, and it recognizes that there will be very big social, regional implications, and not just the coal regions, which will have to undergo structural change. Industrial clusters, as we have them, Port of Rotterdam, for example, will have to undergo changes, and then also the car industry, in the south of Germany, where I'm currently located. You start thinking about what does it mean for the industrial and the social fabric. So that's, I think, is a very important part. And then the external dimension is really brought to the debate in a much, much stronger way. And that's also why we're talking here EU-Mexico. We are under 10% of the global emissions. And just imagine by 2030, the joint Russia-Turkey emissions are higher than the ones of the EU. So unless we find ways of engaging with other countries, Mexico, South Africa, India, Morocco, Russia, Turkey, we will not be able to achieve the goal. European Union net zero by 2050 doesn't really solve the problem. Now, this Green Deal is sometimes outside seen. It came out of the blue. Of course, it's not. It's built upon the previous policies, and you have seen renewable energy efficiency, emissions trading, electrification of transport. That has all been prepared for by and presented by the European Union over the years. And one point is perhaps worth mentioning: when you really want to look a little bit deeper into this, go to the November 2018 long-term strategy, Clean Planet for All. It has hundreds of pages. You can, inform yourself, a lot of calculations, but of course also a 20-page shorter policy document where all these elements are there. Now, before I come, and you wave me the 1 minute, before I come to the COVID part, let me just mention a few focus areas which are worth highlighting in the Green Deal, which is the hydrogen. The low carbon gas element is now very strong. The industrial decarbonization, circular economy, hydrogen again, CCS. The construction materials is a highlight because 50% of our emissions come from materials value chain. So we're moving from energy to construction, agriculture and food, ecosystems, etc. Finance is an important part. The last point is really about the Green Deal. Half a minute. And what it means after COVID-19, that is a little bit the question. Now, there were some early phase calls for calling suspension and rollback, but this was just very few. By now, most member states, almost all member states, say we're going to continue, maybe accelerate. And the European Commission holds very firm as to objectives, targets, and timetable. So nothing yet changed, but the crunch time will really come in September, when we know more about the implications, etc., and when the first decisions will be taken. But what we can say is the economic recovery packages will have a very strong low carbon green element. That is clear and politically will not change. Now I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian. Boris, could you briefly explain what are the main policies on climate change mitigation in Mexico? Who are the main players in terms of decarbonization and economic growth? And what is the role of subnational entities? You have 5 minutes.
Confronting an existential issue, and also that to respond, we have to touch all kinds of human activities as the European Green Deal is thinking. But I would like to touch two issues that are also important thinking about Mexico. One is the normative framework, and the other one, I think, is the technological gap that was mentioned here. I think there are many developments in terms of climate change in the last few years in Mexico City, and we are expecting to have as the special climate change program in the next few months. But I wonder if we're going to follow, or is it going to be similar or following some principles that have been established at the previous one and also at the National Strategy for Climate Change. I wonder if that's going to happen. Let me think about some barriers that I think are important to understand why some of the planning and some of the programs have not effectively been implemented at the subnational levels. And the first thing is the possibility to follow culturally and structurally the stay home guidelines, for example, or any policy, any action that is introduced for climate change or environmental issues in general. The first thing is structurally, we have an economy that is half informal. Working people have to go out in the street to make a living, and it's 50% of it is informal activities. So that's a sort of a barrier, and maybe it's an opportunity to understand and to incorporate somehow in the framework, in the normative framework, as well as in other instruments that can help us implement and develop climate change policies. That's one thing. The second one, I think, is the subnational conditions at the maybe not at the state level, but at the municipalities. Municipalities are weak. Municipalities are supposed to have, in the framework of the climate change proposal, the federal proposal, local authorities should develop their climate change policies, their climate change programs. And I think most of the municipalities, I'm thinking about maybe 400 or so urban municipalities, which are stronger and have a better fiscal basis, but there's still no planning, no possibilities to develop and to have those plans ready. That's another possibility, and that's related to problems that are based on human capital, on financial resources, fiscal policies, as well as technical means in the hands of local authorities. So when we think about subnational level, we are thinking not only at the state level, but we are thinking at the municipalities. But also, and I refer to technological gap and also to normative framework, we have to establish a relationship, a functioning relationship between the state and the municipalities. Municipalities the state level will have a parliament to talk to. But let me refer to another issue that I think is in being incorporated in this, and that's the urban pattern. The urban pattern is very important, and I will probably refer later to Mexico City phenomena and metropolization process. But I think that those two and maybe a few others are important to understand the outcome of this climate change normative framework, which has been developed in paper in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for giving us this initial perspective. Now let's move to some specific issues. Are there any other policy areas that are key for advancing climate action once the COVID-19 crisis is over? Annika, could you please cover both infrastructure and the circular economy? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate in the discussion, and greetings from Brussels. I could also, just to say a few words about the Green Deal and just build on what was said earlier. It is quite striking, and it's quite important to note that at the moment we are in discussions with 27 EU member states, and many of them are signaling very clear and loud that the European Green Deal must be central to a resilient recovery after COVID-19. So it's quite significant that if we can get this buy-in from across the EU, that the Green Deal really becomes our growth strategy, the recovery strategy out of the crisis, that would be significant. And but it goes for the EU as it goes for across the world. What we do need now is we're in desperate need of leaders that recognize and communicate loud and clear that greater sustainability is an answer to the health and the expected economic crisis. And our leaders really need to be clear about the direction of travel and start to create the conditions for people and business to come out stronger from this crisis with those skills and solutions that are needed to face the existential climate crisis. And I would really want to stress this, as it is extremely important that we really do use the recovery from the corona crisis to actually accelerate the transition to a more sustainable and competitive economy. In Europe, there is increasing discussion about achieving a climate neutral economy, and this really should be the period when we are building on these opportunities. So what I would say is that where the real test case at the moment is whether we will be putting our money where our mouth is, and are we giving the investors the signal they need about the direction of travel. We'll be, and this is across the world, we're putting unprecedented amounts of public money to rescue businesses. And arguably, when taxpayers' money is used, it should be conditioned to achieving greater sustainability in the long term. And what we need is investment in those skills, sectors, products and services that are needed to address the climate, biodiversity and wider environmental challenges. So we really need to find ways to create the conditions for people and business to come out stronger from this crisis with those skills and solutions that are needed to face the next one. And if anyone is looking for investment ideas, as mentioned, greater circularity, being smarter with the resources we have is a key. Energy efficiency, renewables, sustainable mobility, agriculture, and the infrastructure that supports this will be a key. And so in Europe, one of the challenges, and this is obviously across the world, but one of the key challenges and test cases will now be, how will we be spending the public money? State aid, new credits, will they be aligned with the goals of the European Green Deal? And also the EU has a budget, which is currently being revised because of the crisis. And the big question is that, are these taxpayers' money, these cents be aligned with the needs and commitments of today? And if we really are serious about this, we should see this across the board. We should stop subsidizing practices such as livestock farming, fossil fuels that are evidently harmful to people's well-being, health, the environment and the climate. And we should invest in the future we want, which is a competitive and sustainable economy and society. And I'll just finish off with a word on circular economy, which is a big concept in Europe and that is being promoted. There's a very strong rationale for Europe and Europeans to rethink what and how we produce and consume. And the coronavirus crisis has itself demonstrated the vulnerabilities within global supply chains. And as Europe is extremely dependent on exports, being smarter with the resources we have within our borders would allow us to control materials better, create more value from, allow us to become less dependent on major raw material exporters. So when we're talking about circular economy, it is really about trying to maintain the value of products and materials for as long as possible, trying to minimize resource use and waste by increasing repair, recovery, reuse, and recycling of materials and products. And we see in Europe, this would really help us a lot in trying to reduce our emissions, but also addressing a wider environmental climate challenges. And it's good to keep in mind that actually greater circularity is key to ensuring a transition also to more sustainable energy, mobility, and food systems. And this really should be at the heart of all our recovery efforts.
Thank you very much, Annika. As we stated previously, the COVID-19 outbreak has one silver lining at least. The reduction in greenhouse gas emissions all around the globe due to the decline in industrial production, public and personal transportation, and the paralysis of the aviation industry However, it has come at a big cost. Solange, was something like this needed to take climate change seriously and realize doing things differently is possible? Could you share any ideas on what policymakers, the private sector, and civil society learned from this exceptional circumstance to shape new habits post-lockdown to reduce our climate and environmental footprint? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I don't want to repeat some things, especially Annika circular economy, because I have in my lessons learned. But I am going to take to give you 5 lessons that I think is the more important ones that we can take after COVID-19 and a post COVID-19 era. First of all, is how we do business. And I think the first thing is from the small businesses, the daily work. We have learned that remote working is something feasible, that people don't go to the office every day and spend hours using transports and cars, and they can do home office as good as they do in the office. So I think it will help to reduce international thousands of participants. In fact, there is going to be a conference in the convention started 30,000 participants. That conference is every year is taking place. Now we are going online. So what does it mean? It means that are not going to be in planes, in airplanes or in cars. They are going to be at home. So it is very important to see that, because there is not there is a lot of international conferences that now can be taken at home. So it will reduce a lot of international traffic and airplanes in the air. And I think it is something that is going to be more regular and a normality. It also has to be with training in businesses, because business use the cost of a training for learning for workers and employees. The most important is expenditure. So now more traffic. They are not going to take airplanes and the industrial process, because commerce also, because there have opportunities for automation of goods and services. Now that we cannot be together anymore, and at least for 12 and 18 months, businesses and industrial and commerce, they have to change and transition to something different. They cannot have workers together in the factory anymore. So all those people need to understand how to use these new opportunities of technology for automation, and in commercial change, it is going to change because it is going to be more important how you deliver your goods and your services. And you can use a lot of ways for using technical, and for example, this conference, Zoom and everything, and you are not going to have all people in factories anymore. I think that there is another one very important, and this is in consume changes. This moment has been an opportunity for people to understand their consume, a different dropped 8.5% just in more important, for example, groceries, but they are leaving other things apart. I think I have just 1 minute, sorry. I am going to say just a quick thing for policymakers, and it is with the strengthening health system. Because COVID-19, it is important to strengthen the health system because for COVID-19, but also for climate change, because we are not prepared also for climate change consequences. So now it is the moment that we can foresee a lot of things that may happen if we don't prepare our these kind of changes and these kind. So I'm sorry, I think it is my time. So I will continue with one last, but in my next moment.
Thank you very much, Solange. Now I have questions for all four of you. We just learned today that we finished the negotiation of our EU-Mexico new agreement, and that is something to celebrate. It comes in the middle of a lot of confusion and a lot of turbulence, but I think it's great news. Mexico and the European Union have collaborated for years in sharing experiences and best practices to further their common objectives regarding climate action. Through their political dialogue, both have advanced cooperation on specific projects to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement and doing the energetic transition and efficient energy use. The current and future circumstances will require both to do much more together. What are some possible areas of cooperation between the EU and Mexico to support long-term strategies for reducing emissions and advancing a truly green economic growth after the COVID-19 crisis? How can we both think about the long term when COVID-19 seems to force us to focus on life and death and certainly economic recovery in the here and now? How do we do that? Let's start with Christian, please. 3 minutes.
To the max to the deal, I will put in some wine afterwards, local wine, which has a lower carbon footprint than the. Now, it's, I'm working with a number of countries in South Africa, India, Brazil, and it's very difficult to come up with joint things. But one of the areas where always there is interest is this concept of the just transition, that you frame it not as an economic issue, which for a long time we have done. It's just an economic, industrial stuff. You need investment, but to frame it in a more social context, the transition of regions is inevitable. And now you see how you can put it into there. That is an area which has really taken a lot of interest in countries like Brazil, but also even Russia and certainly South Africa. Now, another area, obviously, is always this issue about renewables. And I got a lot of questions about renewables. By now, for new build, renewables in Europe is the cheapest, full stop, no discussion. So the question is how you can integrate it in the grid. That's the big issue, not any longer to build any gas plants or whatsoever. So these are areas where you really can where really is important. There's a lot of technical knowledge, but also market knowledge, and there is many other possibilities to cooperate. The third point, if you allow me, is really very much this issue. We had a very brutal discussion until a few years ago, where industry said we lose competitiveness, we get out-competed, we close, and I think you have a lot of this in Mexico as well. The end of the world, if you put climate policy, Pemex disappears from the earth, the next day, all these kind of stories. Now, once you turn it around and say, look, European industrial base is old, let's face it, because we are an old economy. Now, where are our growth areas? Annika has mentioned it. Where are the growth areas? They are not in the old traditional stuff. They are in the green steel. They are in the low carbon cement. They are in the low carbon aluminum. They are in that kind of stuff, the circularity. Suddenly, the CEOs have understood, there is a new potential growth area. I'm a bit less optimistic than Annika. You know, it's easier said than done. We all know that, but nevertheless, it's understood. There is opportunities. Okay, and you have seen these opportunities, and you have seen them in Mexico, in renewables, and that you can also have in other areas.
Thank you so much. Boris, please, what can local entities do? Because as he says, maybe it's the interest of civil society or of local governments or of state governments, but not of the federation. In the case of Mexico, what do we do then?
Sure, but you know, the local governments, the municipalities are heavily dependent on funding from the federal government. You know, so the question is how we are not. Well, the problem is that we don't have, and we will not have in the near future a carbon neutral economy or a carbon neutral policy towards carbon neutral or zero carbon country. But you know, we mentioning Pemex and CFE, also the federal enterprise for electric energy, and it goes to the local. It covers all the territory. And another question is the loss of vegetation. We have lost 40% of vegetation in Mexico. So how can we think of reducing the national footprint? That's one point. So, but let me say that, of course, there are some examples, important examples at the local level. Let's say the city level, that which have implemented a few important actions and strategies that we cannot oversee. For example, the idea of amplifying the offer for for modes, for transport modes, which will push people probably to use low emission vehicles. That's one possibility. The other one is, of course, introducing bicycles, etc., to have a population change from motorized to non-motorized vehicles. But I think Mexico City has had a very important provision of different kind of actions, local actions, very important, that should be used as a benchmark to other cities. And I am referring to incorporating in their policy actions a green agenda with a gray agenda. So, of course, all actions are separated. They're not put together in the big environmental ministry. So you have a transport ministry, and you have an environmental ministry, you have an urban development ministry. So how to coordinate actions, because they are interdependent, they are interrelated. So if you decide to go inside some special spaces, then you have to make sure that the other ministry provides transport modes that are well accepted and accepted by the population. But there is another problem with the footprint at the local level. This urbanization process in Mexico is metropolitan. So it's not only Mexico City that has to deal with the other jurisdictions, not only the CDMX, the Mexico City jurisdiction, but with municipalities, fragmented decision-making. But there are other examples. So to reduce footprint means to traduce the idea of a Green Deal at the political, as a political agenda. And we can see the European New Deal as a model, but it's very, very difficult to introduce it to Mexico, considering the the trying to enforce COMEX, CFE against renewable energies, all this kind of decision making at the government, but also at the enterprises, at the industrial and manufacturing sector are very difficult to stop.
Thank you so much. Not easy then. Annika, what can you tell us?
Thank you. I would maybe focus on 2 points. I'll want to pick on the clean energy transition and possibilities there, as well as air pollution. I think we really should see ourselves as partners in trying to accelerate a transition to a more sustainable economy. And in this, we obviously need to find ways to exchange and also exchange on good practices, have dialogue about the ways forward and try to support ourselves in this effort. When it comes to the clean energy transition, it's clear, and I think it was great how Christian already put it, renewables are already competitive. This is no longer the case. It's really about changing the way we think about our energy systems. And so it is key that we see that actually making our energy systems more sustainable and changing how we use energy is not only good for the climate, but it can also bring significant economic and societal benefits. It can improve energy security, create jobs, and reduce energy costs for consumers, if this is done in a smart way. So we need to try to find ways to improve energy efficiency. It really does remain the low-hanging fruit. We need to try to use the potential with domestically produced renewable energy. There and here, this is a way how we can try to decarbonize our electricity production, heating, transport, and industry. And it makes increasing economic sense. And we already have a number of technologies, heat pumps, geothermal systems, solar heat collectors that could be utilized more. Electric vehicle batteries, electric heating system can provide interesting possibilities for balancing and storing renewable electricity. So again, if anyone is looking for ideas for investments, renewables, improving electricity storage, transmission capacity, as well as energy efficiency, I'm sure it's the same for Mexico as it is to Europe and in European member states. And just on air pollution, I want to finish off with this, as this is an issue, obviously in Mexico, as it is actually surprisingly maybe also in Europe. And what is quite interesting is that linking it with the COVID-19, there are a growing number of studies conducted that show the link between air pollution and the spread of coronavirus. Regions with higher levels of air pollution seem to have higher COVID-19 mortality rates. If these linkages are confirmed, reducing pollution from transport, power and industrial plants, agriculture and heating will become ever more urgent, and it's across the world. If this is the case, there should be no excuses made, and we really should do all we can to reduce air pollution also in places where containment efforts have not yet contributed to bringing them down. And it's good to keep in mind that in all of this, the ultimate aim should be that we try to promote healthy populations and environments as our defense against the corona crisis. And there's a lot of learning to be done on both sides in this.
Certainly, and who would have predicted that COVID-19 could be a blessing in disguise in that sense that you're pointing out, Annika. Thank you so much. Solange, what do you have to say about EU-Mexico cooperation and exchange of best practices?
It has to be with my last lesson that I couldn't finish earlier. And I think the most important lesson from COVID-19 crisis is that scientists long warned this pandemic might happen, but political leaders prefer to ignore those things. If we could we have, sorry, at least east all the climate change crisis. So the sooner the better. If the political leaders have the will to make transitions to clean energies, the better chances societies will have to ease the consequences of climate change. So it has to be with all the cooperation, with all the good practices that European Union have to show to Mexico. Because as Boris said perfectly before, now in Mexico, things have been changing very quickly, but not for the better, not for the best. We are going back like decades. So I think it is time for civil society to understand that now is their opportunity to use this awareness created by the COVID-19 crisis in order to also fight for climate change. One very interesting example that we have seen in the last couple of days in Mexico is the this agreement is to help more than micro and small enterprises, but they don't need the government to do it. They didn't ask for anything. They can. So civil society can act alone. Of course, it's not going to be easy. Of course, public budget is huge and we need it, but there are many things that civil society can still do and can show the government, especially in Mexico, that things can change. And I think civil society organizations in European Union have a lot of good practices to share by lobbying with the parliament and many good practices that they have, they can show and they can teach to Mexican civil societies.
Thank you so much, Solange. Well, thank you all for your insights. And now we're going to take some of the questions from the audience. Christian has run with the keyboard and has answered many of them, but I'll try to adapt them so that all of the others can also participate. I'm going to take one of the questions here and adapt it to both Mexico and the European Union. Apparently, COVID-19 has shown, first, that we have very strong stakeholders in this. We have the automotive industry, we have the aviation industry, etc. And they're going into deep crisis right now. They're demanding resources from the governments. They're asking people not to change their habits because otherwise they'll go under. What are we going to do with them? And the other thing that COVID-19 has shown is that resources are scarce and we need them. So how much of the budget should we be investing in this green policies or these adaptations in terms of infrastructure, a different type of trade, of economy, of the way supply chains work, etc., when we need it for people to survive today because they are out of work right now? How do we do that? Let's go with Annika first.
Thank you. I would say that we always have strong lobbies, no matter, whenever there is, especially whenever there is money involved, there will always be strong lobbies. And I would add there definitely also the farming into that group. Everyone will be trying to defend their own interests. And there's, when we've been discussing the energy transition and mobility transition and overall the transition to a cleaner economy, climate neutrality, we've obviously, a lot of industry has reacted also in these discussions as, and has been on a defensive, because it is, and it's the same for people as well. It's easier to stick as things have been. However, the COVID-19 really is a case for reflection. Public resources are limited, so we really do need to be smart with the use of our money and what we do with the tax, especially with the taxpayers' money. So here it's true. When we are exiting the crisis, there's a lot of demand across society, across the economy for support. And in the first place, obviously, we do need to find ways how we can support citizens, small, medium enterprises in managing the shock. But when we're starting to talk about the recovery, and this is especially when we are talking about the medium and longer term, we do need to also decide when is the moment when we stop providing support for practices that do not actually are not aligned with our sustainability goals. And when we are talking about recovery strategies and the recovery from the crisis, this really does need to be in line with our long-term commitments to greater sustainability. And as mentioned before, there should be money should be conditional, and it should we should not be subsidizing practices that are actually harmful for climate and wider sustainability.
Thank you, Annika. Solange, that's the panorama from Europe. That's the scene. But Europe is a more egalitarian society in the end. Mexico has a big problem with inequality. And we've seen it with this crisis of COVID-19. Not everybody has been able to lock down because they live day to day from going out on the street and selling whatever they sell or whatever they do. How do we do that? How do we combine those two strategies to combat COVID-19 and climate change with such an unequal society as ours?
Well, I think there are many things that are going to change, especially, for example, what Annika was saying. For example, things are different and are going to be different in the coming years. But not because the enterprises or the industries want or not. Going to change is not something that the governments are going to change. It's not policy, unfortunately, but it is not policy. People are not going to use airplanes as they used to be before. They are not going to be in the offices as they used to be, just because it is not safe. And people will not be feel safe to use it. So no matter how a lot of start working for their interest, there are things that are going to change. And I'm also that for the economy. And in Mexico, I think it is a fossil fuels is not a way to go out of this crisis. That there is a lot of jobs, better jobs in, for example, the clean energy, and that will help our people, our citizens to improve their lives, because it is proved that jobs in the clean energy industry are better paid than those in fossil fuel industry, for example. Those in agriculture. Mexico has a lot of small or self-consumed agricultural practices, and we are still subsidizing from the government those practices, and are not something that should continue, because it is not good for the people, because they continue to be impoverished because that, it is not good for the climate, it is not good for the earth. So I think it is the moment to use those examples and.
Okay. Some people have asked about tourism. That is an important industry for both the Europeans and the Mexicans. How are we going to do tourism differently? Let's start with Boris, thinking from the subnational perspective. What can we do differently to face the after COVID-19 world?
Well, I think it's not going to be easy to go into a post-COVID world. I think we should learn a few lessons. One lesson, of course, is health. I think Solange mentioned the health system. I think that's important. And referring to tourism, I think we can see different kind of tourism. And of course, it is difficult to implement, for example, ecotourism in some areas because it puts a lot of pressure in precious areas. But of course, I agree with some of the comments that it is very possible that investment in conventional tourism will be reduced. The problem is the big white elephants we have in this country and all over the world that rely on massive trips, massive tourism that is not necessarily green. To say something, it's not conscious about the environment, consumption, and all these sort of things. So that's a big problem. It is related to air travel. I think tourism is related to air travel, and I was just putting a few comments on the chat that air travel doesn't represent a huge percentage of emissions, but of course it is important, and it is very difficult, as it was mentioned, that the government, of course, the government likes airlines. The government is going to support airlines because it's a very important industry. But I would guess that we have to find a combination in terms of tourism, traveling in the country. For example, I would thinking about Mérida and Cancun. I think we have to establish, and not only that, I think there are other circuits, tourist circuits that are important. Combine archaeological plus sea and sun and beaches tourism, and so there should be some combinations in terms of rationalizing these tourist plans. That's perhaps a possibility. And of course, establishing some guidelines in terms of what is the important behavior and rules that and criteria that the hotels have to deal with. For example, treating water and not sending water to the ocean, as it happens in Cancun, for example, and in other beach centers.
Okay. Thank you very much, Boris. Now, Christian, we've been hearing about everything the European Union is doing. You have a plan, you have a strategy, etc. But in terms of both COVID-19 and climate change, you cannot do it alone. Europe cannot do it alone. What do you demand from the rest of the world? What would you like to see in the rest of the world? What would you like to see from Mexico in terms of combating these two scourges in our panorama?
I think we, I think we have the European Commission delegation on the call. Maybe we ask them. Now, actually, it's not so easy, but let me disagree with you on the first term. COVID-19 we cannot do on our own, but what we have seen in Europe, all the responses have been national. It was on the health side, the competencies on health are not with the European Union, but the member states. So actually there is a difference there. On the health side, COVID, a lot of it has been national. Now there is coordination between the member states to do something else. And you have seen probably the same in Mexico, different regions, or whatever you call them, have probably take different measures at different speed, etc., etc. Now, what can we do together? We are currently thinking about this. We understood European reductions are, not useless, but don't do the trick. So how can we engage other countries? And some areas there are big discussions between the, Russia, for example, and Europe about hydrogen. There is infrastructure, there's gas infrastructure. How could we structure our future energy relationship on something lower carbon? There is ideas of having Black Sea renewable wind investment, which would cover Turkey, Russia, EU member states, energy community. So I would think it's probably more these industrial aspects that could be interesting, or global value chain in low carbon. You could imagine, you have a big motor industry, what would be the Mexican value chain in the future electrified industry? These are the kind of discussions which have to be there. Now they're very early, it's very early. It's very hard to say this is the future of Mexico, this is the future there. But these discussions are led, and they're done also in the G20. The last, the last months before the COVID crisis struck, we got enormous amount of requests for studies and other stuff also from the Gulf. There is understanding that the fossil fuel economy is transforming itself. We don't know in which way, but it will. So there is interest in what it means, circular economy, etc., etc. Interesting would really be, I think, the best thing is industrial, projects. And when I just look back, and then I stop before you give me the hand, when I just recall back, the most interesting in Mexico, in Europe, we have gotten from the successful investment of European companies in renewable energy in Mexico. You had the cheapest prices, and then suddenly, hey, why can the bloody Mexicans do it so cheaply? What do they better than us? I mean, I don't know the details exactly, by now I know them. So, these are the kind of things that could be interesting. And when we talked then to our energy companies, they said, yes, there are global value chains. Certain things we do globally, some we do locally, some we do in Europe, etc., etc. And I think there will be more of this to come. And if we do low carbon, if we do low carbon cement in Europe, your cement company, what is it? I forgot the name. Will certainly be part of it. They have lots of operations. When you go from the airport to the airport, bad word now. From Paris, you see a lot of operations. You see a lot of operations of Mexican company on this side.
It's CEMEX, Christian, CEMEX.
Exactly, not Pemex.
Well, in the end.
In
the end, it seems to me that we have to work at all levels, all sectors of society, all at the same time with scarce resources, and especially very little time to do the changes that we need. Some people are asking, is this a problem with global governance overall? Do we need some kind of institution, some kind of organization to tell us the way to help us do this sharing of best practices, or can we do it on our own? As you mentioned, Christian, many of the responses have not only been national, but even regional to COVID-19. And at the same time, maybe that's a good thing to start from the lowest level of government and go up to try and solve both COVID-19 and the climate change crisis. What are your thoughts on global governance? Just the one thought, each one. Let's start with Annika.
It's a key. These kind of crises, COVID-19, climate change, these are global crises that require global collaboration. Obviously, we do have a number of fora where we need to address these. It has also, I would say, the COVID-19, the crisis that we are still going through, it provides us extremely important lessons that we need to take into consideration when we prepare for future crises that are looming and will come. And we need to strengthen our cooperation and use this crisis as really to learn how we better prepare and prevent future crises.
Thank you. Solange, what do you say about global governance and Mexico's role in it?
I think that this crisis has shown that international institutions are, we need to change them. There is a vacuum in the United Nations leadership. There is a vacuum in the WHO leadership in this crisis. They are not leading the steps. United States is not leading the steps, and as Christian said, European Union is also not leading the steps. For some moments in this crisis, China appeared to be the one, which is for me frightening. I think it's something that we need to also think about to change our institutions. Of course, in the case of Mexico, we are not leading this change.
Thank you, Solange. Boris, are we a good partner, Mexicans, in terms of global governance? Are we doing our part?
Well, I am optimistic about the United Nations functions, and so I think Mexico has been quite good in terms of accomplishing and behaving vis-a-vis the agencies, all the agencies. So I think the United Nations is one very important actor. And I think it is important to strengthen United Nations environmental programs, United Nations development program, FAO, and things like that. But the problem is, I think this happens at the intergovernmental level between agencies, but it also happens at the local level. How to coordinate, how to find ways to coordinate and to agree and discuss and have a dialogue in terms an ex-ante dialogue before making decisions. I think that's an important issue at all scales and at all levels. So I am optimistic, and let me say that there is a important also fact which the city of Mexico has is a good example, how to establish and consolidate the linkages with international agencies, not only intergovernmental, but private NGOs, all kinds of funding organizations. That it's very important to keep them working, because that will provide circulation of ideas and circulation of good examples and good lessons.
Okay, thank you. Christian, will the European Union lead by example? The key to global governance in the future post-COVID-19?
Look, Érika, you should have asked Boris to have the last word. You know, it would have been more optimistic, the closing. You can still reverse the orders and then bring Boris again. You know, I mean, I think the good news is really we're looking for a global leadership, and here is a place for Mexico. You know, once you sort out your situation with your northern neighbor, you know, we'll be fine. No, but a little bit more seriously. You know, when I was young, the world was simple. On environment, you needed the US, Europe, and Japan, and you got a deal. Huh? These days are over. I mean, there's plenty of evidence, and the rest somehow falls into place. Montreal Protocol, you go wherever. Huh? Now, I've been involved in climate since more than 30 years. You see, I'm gray, not because of this, it's just age. And, you know, what I've learned is the UN is not the solution. And I think that's how it's seen in Europe as well. It's neither the problem. Huh? It's not the problem either. That's also fair. So I'm less optimistic than Boris. Let's have a drink one of these days to discuss this further. And what I've also seen is, you know, we got in Europe into very national reactions to all of this. And that's not the first time. It's not just COVID. So I think we need to look a bit at our concepts of global governance. We seem to have a
We cannot hear you, Christian. What happened? I think you'll have to write it down, Christian, because we cannot hear you, and we are already a little bit late in closing this webinar.
All right,
I have to.
Okay.
Now you're back. Okay.
No, I'm just, the last point was really Europe is currently probably as unstable as never before. Let's just be realistic. It will be difficult for us to lead. You know, talk us in a few years again, you know, maybe in a better space. On climate, we're gonna lead, no doubts, but we still develop the ideas how this could be done.
Thank you very, very much for this discussion, which has thrown some light on the twin challenges of COVID-19 and climate change, both for Mexico and the European Union. I think it will take the best and the brightest of ideas and mostly political will and individual responsibility, as well as collective action to overcome them. The time is now, I repeat. I think our audience has been great. Thank you so much for joining us. They will be sending you a survey by email, so please answer it. And finally, I would very much like to thank everyone for your participation, and particularly the delegation of the European Union in Mexico, as well as Érika and Edna for promoting these webinars and these dialogues on COVID-19, and for letting me be a part of this wonderful experience. My best wishes for all of you and your families, and please be safe.